Douglas MacArthur's mother receiving a letter. Now we're going way back to the early part of the century, asking, Mrs. MacArthur writes a letter to the Harriman family, one of the great wealthy families of the country, asking them, do they have a job for her son, Doug? And what's interesting is the Harrimans are business partners of the Bushes in Brown Brothers Harriman. So all of this very, old boy network type of thing, shaping the massive income flows, the stabilization of dictators. All this is a sort of hidden history. That's why the subtitle was changed on Family Secrets, 50 years of hidden history. It really is. And we miss all this stuff. And the mainstream media coverage, they just don't go to those other levels to try to figure out the larger kind of equation that's kept from us.
I'm speaking with Russ Baker. He's the author of Family of Secrets. What's the new subtitle there?
Here, let me just hand it to you. There it is.
The Bush Dynasty, America's Invisible Government, and the Hidden History of the last 50 years. We are speaking about UBS, the Union Bank of Switzerland, and its connections with Texas-based Harken Energy. I'm Bonnie Faulkner. This is Guns and Butter. Well, Russ, before we leave the Philippines, could you talk a little bit about Freeport Mining and the Rockefellers? I mean, there's a big connection there with the Philippines and these same cast of characters.
Sure. I mean, as you know, one of my main things is being a sort of a media critic, and the reason I started whowhatwhy.com, which is a nonprofit investigative reporting site, we're still in the process of building support for, building an editorial team, raising money and so forth, is because of the inadequacy of the exploration of some of the big institutional factors in our world, and certainly resource extraction. Since I started working on Family of Secrets, it became very clear to me that that's the name of the game. I don't know that there's anything, if you look in business, finance obviously is huge, but a big part of finance is resource extraction. It's you can shift your manufacturing elsewhere. You can shift your services elsewhere, but you always need the basics to keep the lights on, to keep the air conditioning, the heat on, to run the cars and so on. This is absolutely critical to our survival. And so who control these kinds of resources? There are companies like Freeport Mining, which started out of Texas, and has really received very, very little attention. They were huge and are in places like Indonesia, where they had a stake in the removal of the nationalist president Sukarno, who was a leader of the non-aligned movement, and for the dictator Suharto. And I've been there, and I've seen, I've been in that region in Irian Jaya, a remote part of Indonesia, where they fought against independence movements. These incredible mines, they've got copper mines and then gold mines and all different kinds of mines. And Freeport's board very much had Rockefellers and people from some of these other old Eastern families. The Bush is very much wired into that. They're crucial. They're all part of this equation.
I'm speaking with Russ Baker, author of Family of Secrets. I'm Bonnie Faulkner. This is Guns and Butter. Well, with regard to Harken, is Harken still in business?
They are, yes.
They are.
Yeah.
Now, are they back to being a sort of a small company? What are they doing in the?
I haven't followed them that closely in recent years. They continue to be sort of a strange outfit. I mean, I think that after all of this scrutiny in recent years, there may end up being less to look at. That usually is what happens with these things. But it's still around, and the people involved in it it's still a strange thing. Anybody who likes to, some of your listeners may like to kind of dig into these things, may want to have a look at the reports, and I'd love to hear from them what they're seeing about the more recent activities. Well,
you point out in your book that people that take a hard look at Harken and the books and the transactions, it's almost impossible to understand what was going on. It's like an Enron-style accounting. Weren't they like moving money in and out? and it's an Enron kind of a scam, I guess.
I don't want to characterize it particularly except to say that they definitely had some very, very complex semi-independent entities where they were moving things. In other words, so one entity could show profits when they needed to show it, the other could show a loss when they needed to show a loss. It seemed as if, and this is based on people who know more about these sorts of matters than I do, who took a look at this, that they were offering certain entities, perhaps Harvard, which was involved in some of these other entities, when they needed when they didn't need to show a profit, that they would be moved into those entities. And that's, of course, a big part of what Enron was all about. And we're now hearing that some of these other entities, Lehman Brothers, we're now finding out was deeply involved in these types of things. But keep in mind that Harkin was an early player in developing these things, and then the links actually to people like Donaldson, who goes on to run the SEC, that there are one or two step removed links all over the place. There was another company with Harkin called Frontier, where these billionaire South African things. By the way, I should emphasize the Swiss connection is huge here, because these South Africans who got involved with this enterprise, they were a billionaire family in mining, in tobacco, in cigarettes. They also owned some of the luxury brands people would be familiar with, Cartier and so forth. And they just got into all of these things. But they had on their board, one of the top people on their board was a chairman of UBS. So it's all a very close knit circle, you might say. In a sense, these are kind of people who, to some extent, sort of run the world.
Now, also with regard to UBS, I believe what you point out in your article, I mean, there's this whole other subject of the whistleblower going to jail. You say that it was actually an IRS audit of a U.S. citizen that led to a UBS banker who blew the whistle on the tax evasion, basically. As
I understand it, he was in trouble because he came up on their radar, and he basically said, I'll cooperate. The term whistleblower, some people think it should, some people think it should not be used in his case, because it wasn't that he just came forward out of the goodness of his heart. However, I do understand that he was internally raising red flags about practices inside the bank. And his superiors were not at all interested in hearing about it. But anyway, he was going to be hung out to dry, and he didn't want that to happen. This has happened, by the way, with many of these banks where there was one person. If you go back and you look, some of the British banks, Barings and so forth, you see one person goes to jail. I suspect that in a lot of these cases, if they don't talk a lot, they're compensated somehow on the back end not to turn over their superiors. But this fellow wasn't going to do it, and that's very dangerous what he did, to really kind of blow the whistle on the whole thing. And then we find out that UBS has 52,000 Americans not paying their taxes thanks to them. Of course, we still haven't. This is another interesting question. Obama, they compromised with them that they only had to reveal several thousand out of the 52,000. But these names are very, very slow in coming out, and I think a good golf game with Obama doesn't exactly hurt.
Well, right, and I mean these practices are still going on. This is what can I say? Well,
this is important to us because, you see, you and I, if we've got any withholding from our paychecks, or even if we're independent contractors, I mean, they audit, the federal government audits small people at an extremely high rate compared to these big corporations. There's been a kind of a brouhaha recently about that because, of course, they should be auditing all of these large corporations because the payoff and what they get is enormous. And with small people, it tends to be kind of harassment. The payoff is not very big. But, absolutely, this is, we suffer because these people, who are tremendously wealthy and who derive the greatest benefits from living in this country, percentage-wise, in terms of the benefits that they receive from security, from the use of our airports and our highways and our resources, the contracts that they get from the government, they benefit and they don't pay. And so this is a big crime. This is very, very important.
Well, Russ,